Hey everyone, Sycra here, and today I thought I would walk you through how I do some figure drawings, and um, it's at 2 times speed because there's 50 minutes of content, and pretty much I figured if I did it real time, it'd probably be way too boring, but I didn't want it to be too fast either, so that you'd get a realistic sense of, what it's like. And the figures are on the screen for 5 minutes. And yeah. So let's get to it. So, first thing I do is I start with the gesture, and you might have seen it as like a rough stick figure. And once I've got that, then I tend to build on it. And I think before I covered gesture drawing and I mentioned about how you find the center line and you find the collarbones and the angle of the hips, and all that does apply, but it's something that after you do this for a while you don't really need to go through those steps. So I'm skipping some steps just because they're no longer necessary. Yeah, and the program I'm using is MyPaint, and it is free, and I'm using the pencil brush, I guess. It's all default, and what I like about MyPaint is just that it's an infinite canvas program, and so you can just keep scrolling and zooming in and out forever, and it's fine. Actually, I don't know if you can scroll in and out, because I don't think it's a vector-based thing, but it is an infinite canvas. Anyway, it's not super important. And then the other thing I should mention is I am not doing a photo study. I'm not trying to match the image perfectly. I'm trying to get the pose. That's the most important thing. And then if I get the likeness, fine. If not, it's not a big concern of mine. I'm just trying to, as I said, get the pose. And the advantage of this is that you get out of this copy mode of thinking, and usually what happens is, for me anyway, this happened where I would start figure drawing and I'd try and make it look like the model, and I would pay attention to the angles of things and measurements and making sure it just looks like what I see, and I found I was turning off most of my brain. I wasn't really learning as much. I was just copying, right? So you get in this mode, and you can do this with studies as well, where you just look at a picture and you train first on how to see values, how to see color, how to measure angles and things, and get things in proportion so you can draw what you see. But then it's very easy to get way too comfortable with that, and sometimes people will get in the habit of doing a lot of photorealistic stuff from reference, and it's rewarding because it looks like what you want it to look like. It's like, hey, I want this to look like this photo. Wow, it does, and I can pull that off. Isn't that impressive? But I think the danger with that can be that it's very difficult then to create things from imagination. And so when you instead are just trying to copy the pose and not necessarily maintain the full likeness, I think, as long as it's by choice, I think it puts you in a different mind space where you're not just copying, and instead you're really thinking more about, well, what is the pose, or what is the anatomy, or things like that. So in this one, I think I made the head way too big. I think I pushed it a bit too far. And I'm trying to put everything in my style because I decided that a while back that I'm not going to do stuff outside of my style anymore. I'm just going to do things within my style, and if people don't like it, they can, there's other artists that do photorealism and things. So yeah, in this particular one, I can see very clearly, like, the proportions are really messed up, even considering my style. I think it's a bit extreme, but whatever, right? You can't be afraid to make mistakes. Um, so this one, right? This girl, to me, the body is very skinny and very elongated. So I'm pushing that even further. I'm making her more skinny and more elongated. And the important thing is to get the feeling, the energy of that. And so you saw how I started with just basic lines, and I'm pressing very light with my tablet pen on my Cintiq so that the line is very light. Traditionally, you would just use a lighter touch, and that's to get the initial energy, and then it's almost like, I don't know, I'm sculpting out the more defined forms. So your eye will notice whatever the darkest line is, and it will tend to ignore the lighter line. So you see when I define that, like that butt area in the back, the arch of the lower back, there's some lighter lines underneath that you sort of don't pay attention to anymore. They just disappear. And this image was kind of difficult because I'm actually not sure what is going on with her face. It looks like there's some kind of cloth, or I don't know, something. I don't even know, it might be her hair, but there's something covering her face. So that made things a little tricky, and I just interpreted it as if it was some kind of cloth, I suppose. And yeah, I'm trying to okay, so I'm not just copying the reference, and you can see, like, if I was just copying the reference, you look at her arms and you look in between her arms, right? There is a shape, and it is a blue shape. It's kind of rectangular ish, and it's in between her arms, and that's that negative shape. I could have just copied that, and then I would have got the proportions much closer. But again, this is about not necessarily copying exactly what you see, but trying to draw things that look like they work. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm making any sense. So this one, again, getting the big gesture. And then, because she's on the ground, whenever there's some... I guess you could do this for standing poses too, but especially for reclining poses, if there's a lot of contact with the ground, or in this particular instance, you can see there's a lot of Z, the Z-axis, the Z-axis, where her hand is making contact with the ground, and her knee is making contact with the ground, her whole leg is making contact with the ground, but they're in different planes, right? Like, her leg is much closer to us, the camera anyway, than her hand, which is further back in space. So whenever I have a situation like that, I'll throw in a basic ground plane. And you could look at it and say, well, that's not the perspective, that's not exactly right, and it doesn't have to be exact, it just has to be decent enough to give your brain or to create the illusion that you're looking at a 3D space. And I don't know, for me it helps. And so whenever there's large portions that are touching the ground, or there's some perspective that I need to consider, then I'll go ahead and put that in. And you see, with hair, with the whole faces, I tend to take a lot more liberty, and that's because I'm more familiar with faces than I am with bodies, and that's why I do these figure drawings. And I do these all the time, maybe 3 or 4 times a week. I'll do some form of figure drawing stuff. I could be doing more. Maybe it would be good for me. But my point is, it's not that this stuff is easy to me at all. It's just I do this a lot. So if there's anyone who looks at this and is a bit discouraged in whatever way. Maybe you cannot draw as fast, or it's harder to maintain proportions. Just remember that I have a lot of experience, and, well, it kind of feels bad to even say that I have experience, because I feel like I suck. And I feel like people would be like, dude, you have experience, your pictures aren't very good. But anyway, I skipped that one because I didn't want to do another reclining pose. Um, and in that last one below, it's difficult because I see a lot of flaws now looking back at it that you don't notice at the time, because this is very brain intensive. Doing these type of studies, it takes a lot out of you, or it does for me anyway. It's as I said, it's difficult, and that's why it's kind of fun too. It's because it's so challenging, and so I like it. I like doing that. For this one, one of the difficult things was to maintain proportions, and the figure is small, and I used to have this tendency to make the figure much larger on the page, and I still made it larger than the reference, but there's something to be had in drawing things smaller. It's easier to maintain proportions. I really struggled with the face on this one, because I was trying to stick to my style, but at the same time, I didn't want to deviate too much from how she looked. I thought it was very interesting the way okay, so she's in side view, and from her nose to her chin, it's pretty straight, but it almost looks like it's curved inwards. And yeah, I just found that interesting. I'm not satisfied with the hair on this one. I think the shape I gave it, because I like to go crazy with hair. I figured that if you're going to go crazy with something, if you want to maintain a likeness, go crazy with the hair, because it's not going to disrupt the likeness too much. Whereas, if you go crazy with, which I do, but the facial proportions, it's going to be harder to make it look like the person. And yeah, so there's that. And I'm also paying attention to how hard I press with my pen to maintain almost line weight. So if you look at like her breast, it's much lighter than the crease where her arm overlaps her torso. That shadow is darker. So I want to maintain that. And that stuff is actually pretty important, especially when you're doing things like teeth. I see this a lot with people. They draw mouths and they'll draw teeth, and they draw each individual tooth outlined pretty dark. And the problem with that is that's not the way it looks. If you look in a mirror and squint your eyes, it's more often that your teeth will almost create one big shape of, like, let's hope white, maybe some form of off-white. And so if you are going to put in the individual teeth, it's probably better to do it with a very light touch. Unless if you're inking, then it's probably best to not actually outline all the teeth and to group them together. Okay, so this one was more difficult because, I mean, when I saw it, it sort of scared me, because it's 3 figures and they're interacting, and I've still got 5 minutes and I need to get them all in, and I need to maintain the proportions and everything. So I started with stick figures, and I put down as much information in the beginning as possible, because if I have information down, then I have something to judge based on, like, well, should this be higher or lower? So you might be able to see the initial sketches of the girl on the left, where I first put in her arm, and then that was in the very initial gesture, and then I changed the position, because it's you just look back and forth and it's like, oh, actually the arm's not there. And this is what's great about drawing very light, and also having, using like a pencil, and this works for real life too. So there's no reason a traditional artist should be looking at this and being concerned that they can't do the same thing. maybe I undo sometimes. I think I did in this session where I'll sometimes undo, so it's like, yeah, but I don't know. Erasers exist as well. It's whatever. It's not a big deal. I barely ever undo. So my point is, you can do this traditionally too. Um, so yeah, I got the basic stick figure, and then I wanted to get sort of this flour sack shape for the torso um, that encapsulates the ribs and the pelvis. And yeah, not much time, so that's about as far as I could take that one. But I think most of the information was down. This one I started with the head instead of the big gesture, and then I corrected it. It's very easy to forget your own, I don't know, process. Like, people talk, and I talk about, how you should do things and what you should pay attention to and all this stuff. But it doesn't mean I always follow my own advice, simply because it's really easy in the moment to forget and to see something, and then you just go back to old habits where you are, starting with the head or whatever. Like, it's not a bad thing to start with the head necessarily, but it is a good idea usually to get in the big gesture right away. But anyway, and this is where mileage, it's always about mileage. I'm sorry if I am pissing you off by always talking about mileage, but it's really where mileage comes into play, because if you practice good habits over and over and over again, you're less likely to fall into bad habits. And even though I might make some mistakes about, not starting with the big gesture, more often than not I do, and I used to be much worse at that issue. And yeah, it sucks when you're watching playbacks of you drawing and realizing, like, man, totally got that foot wrong, man. It's like everything is off, but whatever. Learning. I don't know. It's weird because a lot of people will compliment me on, oh, you're good at drawing, but if one guy's like, you're not that good, it's hard to remember all the positive stuff sometimes. But anyway, enough about that. So with this breast, again, it was difficult because I wanted to get this feeling of roundness. Like, when you look at the reference, there's this really strong feeling of the breast being squished by the arm against the body, and I don't think I captured that. So, oh well. Trial and error. Eventually I'll do a drawing and I'll make a line and it'll work, and I'll be like, whoa, so that's how you do it. And then that's pretty much how most of the leveling up happens. It's just drawing and then making some kind of accident and looking at that accident and realizing, like, that actually looks better, or that actually solved the problem. And you can do this much more directed, where you think about things and just make a bunch of trials. Like, what if I do this? Okay, that's the result. What if I do that? Okay, that's the result. And then just build on it. So, yeah, for this pose, I just really wanted to get the stretch. Like, there's really a strong feeling of her torso being stretched and gravity and things. So that was the important thing to me, is to maintain that. And then again, the other thing I was really trying to focus on is how the torso itself, it's more boxy than round. Sometimes you see mannequin figures and they're like a circly or an oval for the rib cage, and a bowl shape for the pelvis. And that's fine, and it works a lot of the times, but in certain situations, like this one especially, I feel the torso is much more boxy, and when you do see things as boxes, it's a bit easier to determine what the planes are, and I almost feel like you learn more because if you have an oval, you can get away with murder pretty much because I don't know how to explain it, but ovals, you know, they're gonna look fine even if you get the separation a little bit off. But with a box shape, it has to be more correct because if it's not correct, it's going to show up as being out of proportion. So, yeah. Now, this one, I'm not gonna lie, this one is freaking awkward. This is a weird pose, and I don't know, it felt uncomfortable doing it, drawing it, I mean, and I like the hands; those are cool. Like, but the rest, it's just, uh, I don't know. It just felt strange to me, and anyway, um, and in mine, I made it worse because I drew the face and it looks like really the proportions were off or something, so it looks much younger than I anticipated, and it's like, ew, oh no. Anyway, that's okay, right? That's failure for you. It's important. It's good to fail, um, because that's how you learn. So next time, if I was to do this, I would probably be paying more attention to the proportions of the face. And yeah, I think it's really a good thing when you get away from this feeling of having to do things right, because you don't learn when it's right. It's, well, maybe a little bit, but you learn more when it's wrong, and you have to correct stuff and figure out why it's not working. And I know it's frustrating, and it used to be for me that it was just too frustrating. It was a thing that it just took out the fun when I would fail. I didn't feel like drawing after I had a horrible failure. Um, but that's because I didn't fully understand the way things work. You know, that it's part of the process and it's okay. And once you get that, it's part of it, then, and you've done a lot of drawings and you understand, like, not all of these are going to be good, then it's okay. And also, I guess, if it really bothered you, you could just not show the bad ones. Because I'm recording this, I don't have that luxury that I can just hide ones, but whatever. I still think I probably learned something. And yeah. So this one, I started with the rocking chair itself because this figure is on this object. So to start with the figure, it's almost like, I don't know, starting, like if I was drawing a person inside a car, I would draw the car and then I would draw the seat within the car and then I would draw the person in the seat. I wouldn't draw the person and then the seat and then the car because that's harder to maintain correct proportions. So it was important for me to first establish the setting. What is the setting? Well, the setting is in this chair, and I also put some sort of vague perspective lines. I think I got the butt completely out of proportion, but whatever. And so spent quite a bit of time actually on the chair, even though it's not a chair drawing. But by doing that, just by having the extra time devoted to the chair, it made it so the proportions of the girl were much easier to put in. And if you're wondering why all of these are girls, I actually did start with a test where I did it with both genders, and it was there was some image that popped up right away that's like, oh, I don't want to be drawing this. So I decided I would just draw what I like to draw. Anyway, so for this one, it was important for me to get the feeling of the stretchiness, the pulling on the chair, and I think I actually like this one. I think this one turned out pretty good. So this is the last one. That's where I'm gonna stop. I was kind of happy with this one, so it's good place to end, right? So anyway, hope you try this life drawing stuff, and I hope this helped to see how I go about doing it and where gestures actually come into play, because I use gestures all the time, even when I'm doing longer poses. It all starts with the foundational gesture. So yeah, hope it helped, and thanks for watching.